All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will be doing a very basic review of factoring and all different types of factoring. Again, keep in mind that this is more for Algebra 1 students and not Algebra 2 students because factoring in Algebra 2 does get a little more complicated. So if we are looking at, again, for my class, we are looking at the Unit 7 factoring review packet. Now, in the top here, we do have a warm-up. I'm not going to spend much time here, but the one thing that I do want to point out is if you are factoring, quite frequently I'll come right out and say try to use the diamond method. If you know some other fancy methods as to how to solve this, more power to you. But in our class, we went straight for the diamond method. So even though a diamond is not given to you, on the test it will not be given to you, make sure that you read the directions carefully because I do quite frequently give hints like that to use the diamond method. So again, I'm not going to do the warm-up problems. I'm going to go ahead down to these examples down below. Again, if you read the directions carefully, it says diamond method. So if you really are good at the diamond method, I would highly recommend you just going through and putting diamonds for all of these. A reminder that when you're looking at filling these in, the C is going to be up top and the B is going to be down below. Now, if you're wondering yourself, what is the C and what is the B? Quite frequently when you're looking at a trinomial like this, the A comes first, the B comes second, and the C comes last. For us, the A is always going to be 1, so you don't really have to worry about the A. If you look through all of these, the A's are 1. I remind you that the strategy you're about to see only works if A is 1. Now, in this case, the A is 1, of course, so we can go ahead and fill in the C and the B. I would recommend that maybe, if you think you're going to forget about which one goes on top, maybe go ahead and do that for all of them. Just remember that the C goes on top and the B goes on the bottom. And that way you don't have to really worry about filling them in or anything after that. You can just go ahead and solve them after this point. You will also reminder is that the addition goes on the bottom and the multiplication goes on the top. So when you're trying to fill in these diamonds, make sure you're kind of considering what multiplies to 10. Now, someone I was working with once, we had a strategy that I was like, okay, well, let's list out everything that multiplies to 10. We have a 1 and a 10, we have a 2 and a 5, and that's about it. Now, we are trying to get it to be a -7, so odds are, in order for it to be negative, these would both have to be negatives, because if one of them was positive and one was negative, that would mean that the 10 would be negative. This 10 is positive. So they're either both going to be positive or both be negative in order to give me a positive 10. Now I want it to add up to a -7. So -1 plus -10 doesn't give me -7. So I can rule those two out. -2 plus -5 gives me -7. So you're going to go ahead and go with the -2 and -5. So if you kind of like that strategy, just make sure you're staying really organized with it because like in this one, 24, you could have 1 and 24. You could have 2 and 12, 3 and 4, or sorry, 3 and 8, 3 and 8, and then 4 and 6, right? So these are all your options, and you can see the list kind of gets a little long. Now again, this one says that you want them to multiply to a -24, so one of these numbers would have to be negative, but then they have to add together to be a -2. So kind of when you think of that adding together to be a -2, think along the lines of subtraction because one of the numbers is going to be negative. So, 4 minus 6 would give me -2. And that was just kind of a lucky guess there. But if I make that 6 negative, 4 plus a -6 gives me -2, and those are going to be my answers. So you can either cross out the rest or you can kind of circle your chosen answer there. So again, these triangles are all filled in for you. So, setting those up shouldn't be a piece of cake. These do take a while to adjust to, so honestly, I'm not going to do many of them because I want you to practice them. And this is just a review. Now, the next section, now neither of these are negative, so you might want to go back and look at some negative ones. But factor by grouping says you pretty much group the first two, group the last two. Find the GCF of this one, find the GCF of that one. So if I look at this first one, the GCF here is going to be an x squared. So if I pull an x squared out, it's going to leave me with something along the lines of that. Carry down that plus sign, and then in the second one, pull out the 6. Okay. You should notice that in these grouping, factor by groupings, you should get these matching pieces. That's a good sign. You want those matching pieces. So that's going to be one of your factors. The other factor, doesn't matter whether you put it before or after, is going to be what was on the outside, which was an x squared plus 6. Now, I remind you guys about the negative ones because sometimes if there's a negative, you have to remember to switch the sign inside. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, that this was a negative 6. That would cause the sign inside to switch. So just be careful with that. In this particular problem, you don't have to worry about it. But when it comes to negatives, make sure you switch the signs. Going on to the back side, we are kind of on to the stuff that we did at the beginning of the unit. So the first top section says factor each binomial using GCF. Reminder, we learned 3 different methods to finding the GCF. You learned the ladder method, the Venn diagram method, and then the factor tree method. So whichever one you kind of liked for finding the GCF. Now when it came to factoring, we pretty much stuck with the ladder method. We said, what can you pull out? So we'll pull out a 3. That leaves me with a y squared plus a 2y. And then, of course, don't forget about the variables. I can also pull out a y, leaving me with a y plus 2. Now, of course, that's not your final answer, so don't forget to write it in factored form, which is going to be your 3y and the y plus 2 inside. Okay. So for the rest of these, a reminder, kind of set up your ladder method and be extra careful with your variables. So for example, this one has k5, this one has k10. So when you get to your variables, you want to pull out the smallest amount, which will be a k5, and so forth. Now I will say, looking at D is a little special because if you pull out the 2, that's going to leave you with an m to the 6 minus m. You pull out an m, that leaves you an m5 minus, but you just pulled out the m. So frequently people are like, well, what do I have left behind because I pulled out the m? I have nothing left behind. So in this case, you want to go ahead and just put a 1 in there. Anytime you pull everything out, do remember to put a 1 involved there. The next section to review, only got 2 more sections to go. The next section is just this idea of prime and composite. A reminder that prime basically says when you try to factor it, the only factors are going to be itself and 1. So for example, this first one is prime. This next one, however, although it looks like it's prime because it's also odd, we can factor that down into 3 and 3, or we could factor it down into 9 and 1. So this one has multiple factors, and therefore it's composite. So just a reminder, prime only factors to itself and 1. Composite can factor down to a lot of different things, to be honest. 24, if you were to list all the factors, you could have 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6. So lots of different factors there, making that one composite. So pretty quick and easy section. And then the last one here, really just stressing the difference here that this is going to be GCF and LCMs. So keep in mind you're going to be switching between them. I quite frequently, when doing these sections, kind of highlight whether it's GCF or LCM. GCFs are easy because that's just doing, whichever method you like, the ladder method, the Venn diagram method, or the factor tree method. The LCM, on the other hand, is a little different because this is the one where you have to multiply it out. So you would do 108, so that's times it by 1, times it by 2 would give you, sorry, looking at the wrong one. If I multiply that by 2, gives you 216. If I multiply it by 3, 324. And you could kind of keep going for a couple. Then I would do 72. I would do 72 times 1, 72 times 2, 72 times 3, 72 times 4, until you find one that they match, and therefore that's your answer. So unfortunately, there's no fancy method for finding the LCM other than simply listing out the multiples. And you may want to review your notes on multiples. So if I ask you to list out 5 multiples of 4, right, you would have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, and 24. So make sure you do know how to list out multiples, and you should be good. So again, look back through your notes. That was a very quick review. Looking back, I do notice that I missed one section. Here's multiples. So I just kind of did an example of multiples. But up here, you'll be listing 4 multiples of 12. So start with 12, then 12 times 2, 12 times 3, 12 times 4, 12 times 5, and you should be good. Factors, on the other hand, get smaller. So you're saying things that will divide 12. So that would be 12, 6, 2, 1, and that kind of 4 and 3. So just kind of keep that in mind. Factors get smaller, multiples get bigger. So hopefully that kind of gives you a quick overlaps, and good luck on your test.